Hey scholars, welcome to the guided practice of today's lesson. Let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so the guided practice begins with 2 pre-reading questions, which means questions you would want to look at and answer before reading. So let's look at the first one that's right over here. What is slavery? So we've been talking about the Civil War, and before that slavery, but everything we've been talking about up until this point has had something to do with slaves or slavery. So I want you to, in your own words, kind of describe to me what slavery is. So what is slavery? Slavery is when, for me, it's when someone is forced to work or do something without pay. Okay, so this is kind of my opinion of what slavery is. This is to get my brain used to the idea of what slavery is so that when I read the reading, I can draw comparisons between slavery and sharecropping is what the ultimate goal is. Let's look at number 2. What do you think life was like for enslaved people? Give 2 descriptions or examples. So I'm going to use the sentence starters because I did ask you guys to write in complete sentences, so these sentence starters are meant to make your job easier. For enslaved people, life was... what was life like for enslaved people? Horrible. It was abusive. It was tiring. All those things sound bad to me. So I'm going to put bad. For enslaved people, life was bad. One example of this was maybe getting beaten, often for no reason. Another example of this was, let's see, what's another example? Slaves didn't have the freedom to make their own choices. So these are 2 pre-reading questions that is kind of warming my brain up to the idea of what it was like to be a slave and why slavery, the system of slavery, was such a negative and such a bad thing. Again, that's going to get our brain used to the idea of thinking about slavery, and when we read about sharecropping, kind of drawing comparisons between the 2. All right, so I'm going to take off these annotations. We've answered these questions already. Okay, cool. Let's go ahead and read the reading, and then I'm going to use the blank space above the reading to kind of do my little notes and annotations. So let me draw a line here. Okay. Sharecropping, a new farming system. Let me number these paragraphs. Awesome. Starting at 1. Some white Southerners wanted to make the new situation work. Plantation owners had always depended on slaves to work their fields, but now slavery was a thing of the past. The men and women that planters had once treated as property were free. One Mississippi planter decided to try something new. He would hire the former slaves and, again, benefit from their labor. Only this time he would have to pay for their work. He made an offer to the freemen. I'll fix that when it's your turn to do it. For 3 years, the freed slaves would work the planters' land. In return for this work, they would get a share of the crop. Then, after 3 years, the planter would divide the fields. The former slaves would rent sections of the land. They would be their own bosses and raise their own crops. They would pay for the land, seed, and tools by giving the landowner a share of their crops. They would keep what was left of their crops, but many former slaves agreed to this system, and it became known as sharecropping. But in some ways, life for sharecroppers didn't change much at all compared to slavery. Again, African Americans worked in the land for a white landowner under a predatory system. As before, they used his tools, his animals, and planted his seeds. They lived in shabby houses or shacks that slaves had lived in a few years earlier. Sharecroppers kept a part of the crop they grew. Usually, this was not enough to live on. Often, the white landowner did not give them a fair price for their crop, and the landowner charged the sharecroppers very high rates for the use of his farming tools, equipment, and supplies. In many cases, sharecroppers ended the year owing money to the landowner. Okay, let's break this down paragraph by paragraph. Let's start with paragraph 1. Some white Southerners wanted to make the new situation work. I think the most important sentence is the last one. The men and women that planters had once treated as property were free. So this is kind of setting up the problem that plantation owners are now going to have now that they don't have slaves anymore. Let's move on to the next paragraph. One Mississippi planter tried to do something new. He would hire former slaves and again benefit from their labor. Only this time, he would pay for their work. Okay? So now, the white farm owners are now reaching out to the families and people that they had once enslaved and said, hey, I still need your guys' help. Things are different now. I'll pay you for it. Now, as we read later on, the pay was not that good, but it's better than working for free. All right, let's look at paragraph 3. For 3 years, the freed slaves would work the planter's land. So in a typical agreement between a sharecropper and the person they were renting from, it was a 3-year agreement. In return for the work, they would get a share of the crop. So how would sharecroppers pay the people they rented from? Out of all the crops they grew, they would give a certain amount of that crop to the person they were renting from. Former slaves would rent sections of the land, raise their own crops. So former slaves typically had to pay for the land, seed, and tools that they used from the landowner. Why would they need to pay for the land, the seed, and the tools? Well, I had talked about this with Kai and a few other scholars yesterday that when you are free, if you were a slave and you became free, the only thing that was given to you was your freedom, nothing else. If for your entire life you are working for no pay, when you become free, you are not going to have any money to do anything. You can't start a business, you can't buy tools, you can't buy food. So African Americans are in a very particularly difficult spot to be in because now they have to borrow these things from someone else and eventually pay them back for it. And that's going to kind of trap them in a situation that they're in. The system that was just described in this paragraph is known as sharecropping. Paragraph 4. Life for sharecroppers did not change much compared to slavery. African Americans worked the land for a white landowner under a predatory system. Think about a predator in nature. Predators eat prey. So when I say a predatory system, it's a system that is benefiting one person a lot more than it is another. So in this case, it would be the white landowner greatly benefiting from the services of the sharecropper. Paragraph 5. Sharecroppers kept a part of the crop they grew. Usually this was not enough to live on. Usually this was not enough to live on. So let's say they grew 100 carrots. They would have to almost always give more than half of their carrot supply. So what does that mean with the carrots that's left? You can have 2 options. You can eat it, and then you have no profit, you have no ability to leave your situation, or you can sell it and you can get some money. But now you don't have anything to eat. So now you need to spend the money you earned on food to eat. So it was a situation of entrapment. It was a trap. Landowners charged very high rates for farming tools. And in many cases, sharecroppers ended owing money to the landowner. So that means that the sharecropper typically could not pay off the things that they had borrowed the first year they were working for the landowner, and they would accrue or increase the amount of debt they had to the landowner. All right, let's take all these annotations and use them to answer the, I think, 4 questions that I have for you guys after here. So let's go ahead and do that. Okay, so here's the first question. According to the reading, why did white Southerners need to create a new farming system? Did they want to trap freed African Americans into working for them? I don't think the purpose of the new farming system was to trap them. I think it was to create a system for work. Let's see. In paragraph 1 and 2, the hiring of a former slave was something that, let me see. It was something that was new to Southern planters. So this sentence here, one Mississippi planter decided to try something new. This person decided to try and ask for the help of their former slave. So this wasn't the purpose of the sharecropping system. The reading didn't mention anything about the union, so that's the key word I would have looked for. Because they still needed people to work the plantation. I think this is the answer, simply because it applies to what we read in paragraphs 1 and 2 about how they still need someone to work the land. Where was it? I just saw it. Plantation owners have always depended on slaves to work their fields, but now slavery is a thing of the past. They still need people to work the plantation. Cool. All right. So that was my answer for number 1 after the reading. Let's go ahead and look at number 2. Okay. Number 2. Okay, this is number 2. How was sharecropping different from slavery? Well, the first difference that jumps out to me is we can find that probably in paragraph 3. Former slaves, they could rent things. They could be their own bosses and raise their own crops. So one difference is that in sharecropping, you can kind of, because you still have to pay somebody for the stuff you use, you can kind of be your own boss. So no one is watching over you. So this is what I would put for number 2. How was sharecropping different from slavery? I would find something in paragraph 3, and I would put it into my own words. You could have put one difference is that former slaves can rent sections of the land. You could have said one difference is that they're their own bosses, like I had mentioned, or something that I maybe missed. So that's what I put for number 2. Let's go ahead and move on to number 3. Okay. Number 3. How is sharecropping similar to slavery? And we can find this answer in paragraph 4. So the first sentence of paragraph 4, life for sharecroppers did not change much at all compared to slavery. African Americans worked the land for a white landowner under a predatory system. So this, what I underlined in red, is what is the same between the system of slavery and sharecropping according to the reading. So I'm going to just say what the reading said in my own words. One similarity is that, let's see, African Americans still worked land owned by white men under an abusive system. Now, compared to slavery, sharecropping is definitely not as abusive, but that doesn't mean there aren't bad things to sharecropping. Again, like I said, I took the sentence I underlined in red and I put it in my own words, and that was the answer I provided for number 3. Let's look at the very last one. What was one good thing about sharecropping? So this is kind of like taking the whole reading, analyzing it, and thinking like, out of everything I just read, was anything positive? And I think compared to the situation of slavery, there is a little bit positive to be taken out of sharecropping, especially for African Americans. We're going to read later that most sharecroppers were white, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot of African Americans who participated in it. So let's think. What was one good thing about sharecropping? I think one good thing about sharecropping was that freed African Americans. Now had a job available to them. In a familiar industry. So the reason I think that's a good thing is because after the Civil War, there's an argument of whether or not to educate black people the same way as white people. That means like make them go to school, give them resources and stuff, and that didn't turn out super well. So if you're not educated, the amount of things you know how to do or think you can do is going to be really small. So after a lot of these African Americans were freed, they didn't really know what to do. All they had known their entire life was working the fields. So sharecropping became a system where they could do what they were already good at doing or used to doing, and getting paid for it, even if it wasn't all that much. So in my opinion, I think that was something good. Could it have been better? Yes. But was it good? I think so. And as long as you're able to explain that in the same way that I explained it to you guys, that's okay. All right, guys, that was everything for the guided practice. Go ahead and move on to the independent practice. I'm going to put a tutorial video of how to copy and paste text. Sorry for assuming that you guys knew how to do that. So I'm going to do that so you guys can understand what I'm asking you to do when I say to copy and paste. All right, guys, catch you later.